In case you didn't notice, last week the history of photography changed forever. And I know that probably sounds a bit overly dramatic, but I think it's absolutely true because last week Adobe updated Adobe Photoshop with their new generative AI technology. Ready or not, AI is here. It is in the public version of Photoshop. I have it, you have it, millions of people around the world now have it. And really this new tool boils down in Photoshop to two main tools. Those tools being Generative Fill and Generative Expand. Generative Fill works within an image, and it's a lot like the old content-aware fill tool. I mean, you could use it in that way, to remove subjects and things you don't want in an image, things that are bugging you in the image. You can just, select something and use Generative Fill to replace it. And then you can also use Generative Fill to add things to an image. And this is where the technology gets really crazy and kind of surreal. But then you're able to, just basically add whatever you want to a photo. And then there is Generative Expand, which of the two tools I think is the most interesting because this is a tool that works at the margins of the image. It works around the image as opposed to inside the image. For example, you can take a portrait image like this one with a vertical orientation. I wish at the time I had, shot it as a landscape instead of a portrait. Well, I can just use I could just increase the canvas size, and then using the generative AI technology, Photoshop just naturally blends in an environment that looks real, that looks authentic. The results tend to be kind of blurry and a little smeary, and from a distance they look good. Like you look at it like as a small image on Instagram or social media or something like that. You really don't notice it at all. But when you zoom in, or if you were to make a large print, something like that, well, then you would definitely notice it. Then you'd be able to tell the difference between what parts of an image are real, which parts have been generated by a camera, and which parts of the image have been generated by AI. But that's going to change. That's not going to stay true for long because, Adobe has said it themselves in some of their documentation that eventually higher resolution results are going to be offered. And when when that technology rolls out, we will be able to edit like a 50 megapixel image, maybe even a 100 megapixel image, and we will be able to add AI generated content to it, either with fill or expand, and the average person won't be able to notice the difference because the resolution of the AI generated results are going to be so high, are going to be so detailed. Even we may have trouble differentiating between the two. Even we may not be able to tell or remember what's the real part of the image and what's not. Which brings me to the point of this video and the reason why I wanted to make it, not simply because the new technology is cool and interesting and amazing, and it is all of those things, but rather I want to address the question, a rather fundamental and important question that I think everyone has to answer for themselves ultimately, and that is the question of when is a photograph no longer a photograph? And this is a controversy that's been around for quite a long time, even before Photoshop. When I was messing around with the new tools, I actually thought about this book here. Some of you may have this. This is a book from Bruce Barnbaum called The Art of Photography, and it's a great book. I love this book. Part of the reason why I really like this book is because it's light on photos. There's lots of photos in here, but as you can see, there is a lot of text. I like to read, the thoughts of other photographers, to read, the thought process that's gone into their work. And so that's one of the reasons why I really like this book. But there's a couple of images, but there's one in particular in here that I want to show you. So this image here, check this out, and I'll put another copy of it up here on screen so you can see it up close. What you're looking at here is not a real image. This is what Barnbaum refers to as an idealized landscape. Another way you could describe it is a fictionalized landscape. This image is a composite of two different images from two different places in the United States, taken in two different decades. The bottom image down here, some of you may recognize, those are the Mesquite Sand Dunes in Death Valley. That image was taken in the 1970s. And then this image up here was captured in Utah in the early 1990s. And by the way, this was done without Photoshop. This was done purely in the darkroom. And there's actually another example in here. Yeah, so check this one out. This one, I'm actually just going to show you one image first. So this image here, is of a slot canyon out in, I believe this is either Arizona or Utah. But this image also is not real. The actual image is this one. This is the actual image from that slot canyon. And according to his writings in here, the geometry of the image just wasn't right. The way in which he composed it wasn't right. So he came up with the idea of creating a perfectly symmetrical pattern here and line in this image by flipping the image 90 degrees and then blending the two together and doing some dodging and burning in order to create that arch in the middle there, that shape. Again, purely in the darkroom without Photoshop. And just like the other image, I'm sure, I bet there are some people who probably would look at this, and especially once they know the story behind it, they might look at it and say, well, it's a fake, it's a fraud, it's a phony, it does not exist, it's not real, so it's not a real photograph. Now, obviously, this isn't quite an apples to apples comparison here, this composite image from Bruce Barnbaum compared to Generative Fill and Generative Expand, because this image here, well, it was created using actual photographs created by Bruce Barnbaum. Different places, different times, yet both were actual photos that he created and then he blended together in order to create this composite. So my point here is that, this question about, when is a photograph no longer a photograph is a question that has been going on for far longer than AI, longer than Photoshop, as evidenced by, this book here. Because some people, I think, find value in that which is authentic, that which is true, that which is an honest interpretation and a factual interpretation of reality. And then there are others who appreciate more the subjective input of the artist, like the artist or the photographer who puts themselves into the image, who puts themselves into the work and expresses something about themselves using the raw material, using the image and using the photograph, using what it is that they captured out in the real world. And their intent is not to create a factual and authentic document of reality. Like, that's not why they're creating the image. They're creating the image because they have something to say, because they have something that they want to express creatively. They want to express something about how they see and interpret the world around them. So ultimately, I think it's a question that everyone has to answer for themselves, and there is no right or wrong answer in this debate. For me, there is no better feeling than getting a great image straight out of camera. There's nothing like it. Going to the effort to create a great image, dialing in your composition just so, showing up at just the right time with just the right light, and also a little bit of luck to get good color and good light, and which for me doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, it's amazing. And there's no better feeling, and it is way more gratifying and satisfying to me than any digital manipulation that I might do after the fact. So I guess in a way I'm trying to do a little bit of both. I want a little bit of fiction with my nonfiction. In other words, I want my images to be rooted in reality. I don't really want them to be computer generated or just, fabricated out of thin air. But I also want to make sure that I am expressing a creative viewpoint. I want my images to convey something and to communicate something about how I perceive the world and what I feel and how I see the landscape and the environment when I'm there, and what it is that draws me to it and what I find interesting. And hopefully that comes through in not only the photograph itself, but also in the photo editing and the processing of that image. Because I typically don't process images to look like reality. I always tend to bend the truth a little bit, because sometimes I think bending the truth, injecting some fiction into the nonfiction, is sometimes needed in order to reveal the truth in a subject, if that makes sense. I'm probably getting a little too philosophical here, but that's generally how I think about it. Because, oftentimes the weather doesn't participate, the light doesn't participate. There's all kinds of factors that can go into why an image doesn't come straight out of camera as good as you expected. And so, it's up to you as the photographer, or me, to edit the image and to change the image in such a way so that what it was that I saw in the moment when I was there and what it was that I was experiencing comes through. And sometimes the only way to achieve that is through an artful fabrication of reality. So I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm trying to do a little bit of both. And that's kind of the journey that I'm on with this. Anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough here. I would love to know what you think. I would love to know what your perspective is and where you fall in this. I would love to know, how you perceive the balance between, fiction and nonfiction, and when a photograph is no longer a photograph. Are these things that you've thought about? Are these challenges that you've faced in your own photography? What do you think about it? And what do you think about the new AI tools in Photoshop for that matter? I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to leave some thoughts down below in the comments. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I will see you next time.